He had seen the ad online 3 days earlier. The apartment was stunning, minimalist design, glass walls, skyline views. But it wasn't the apartment that caught his attention. It was the phrasing, "serious inquiries only." He'd seen that line before. It wasn't about price. It was a warning, a dog whistle, not for the financially unqualified, but for the culturally unwelcome. Still, he booked the appointment, not out of defiance, out of curiosity. He wanted to feel the threshold again, the way people subtly told you no without saying it. The expressions, the glances, the pauses. It was something he had learned to read long before he knew how to read code. The agent barely masked her reaction when he arrived. She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. Her eyes scanned his shoes, his bag, the slight crease in his hoodie. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. He was polite, asked the right questions, never raised his voice. And still, he watched her hold the clipboard a little tighter, like she was bracing for a scene that would never come. The apartment was beautiful, exactly what he expected. Exposed beams, brushed steel, soft light from the east-facing windows. She gave the tour like she was reciting a script. Fast, robotic, disengaged. He let her talk, asked nothing about finishes or fixtures, just listened, not to the space but to her. When it ended, she handed him a brochure without making eye contact. "You probably want to think about it." He left with the paper still folded in his hand. 2 blocks away, he tossed it in a trash can without stopping. He didn't need a brochure. He already knew the layout. He already knew the builder. Because he wasn't here to rent. He was here to confirm what he already suspected, that the building was overleveraged. The developer had taken out a series of high-interest loans. Construction had stalled twice. Pre-sales were behind projections. If the next quarter didn't close strong, the asset would be listed quietly, off-market, private auction. And he was ready, not because he wanted revenge, because he wanted the foundation. He went back to his apartment, smaller, older, but paid for in full, and opened his laptop. Spent the next 6 hours finalizing paperwork. His offer wouldn't come with negotiation. It wouldn't need to, because when your funding is your own, your timeline is shorter. And when your motive isn't validation, you don't wait for permission. The next day, he called a contact at the investment firm that held the debt. Made an offer. Clean, fast, final. They didn't hesitate, because capital doesn't ask what you're wearing. It just wants to breathe. The transfer happened fast. No ceremony. No keys handed over with smiles. Just signatures, wire transfers, and a quiet notification email from the holding company's attorney. The asset is now under your ownership. He read it once, closed the screen, and stood by the window of his current apartment, the one they would have said he could afford. Nothing glamorous, just enough light, just enough space, just enough history in the floors to remind him how far he'd come. He didn't go back to the building immediately. He let the silence settle, let the paperwork move through the halls before he ever stepped through the door again. Ownership doesn't need applause. It only needs recognition. And soon that recognition would come. Meanwhile, his team began to move. They were small, tight, fast. A structural engineer who had worked on museums but hated the politics of public bidding. A designer who never finished her degree but had built retail spaces that outperformed every chain she ever mocked. A finance guy who once lost everything in a startup collapse and now built models like they were gospel. They worked from the inside out: blueprints, audits, tenant lists, contracts. He didn't buy the building to flip it. He bought it to repurpose it. Not for profit, for principle. The units weren't the problem. The people were. Not the tenants, but the gatekeepers. Agents, managers, assistants trained not to say no, but to never say yes. Trained to nod at one kind of buyer and flinch at another. Trained to measure success by posture, by vocabulary, by brand of watch. The system didn't punish outsiders. It just never admitted they existed. And now he owned it. Every tile, every hallway, every policy. Still, no one knew. That was the point. He showed up a week later wearing the same hoodie, same shoes. The leasing agent didn't recognize him. She was talking to a new client, well-dressed, loud, familiar. She laughed at his jokes, promised him the unit wouldn't be on the market long. When she saw Andre, she paused, squinted, then returned to her pitch without greeting him. He waited. When she finished, she turned to him slowly. "Can I help you?" He said yes, told her he was meeting someone upstairs. She frowned. "There's no one listed for that unit." He smiled. "That's all right. I'll just go check in myself." She was about to object when the building manager stepped out of the elevator. He stopped mid-stride. Recognition flickered across his face. Then panic. "Sir, yes. Right this way." The leasing agent froze. Watched as Andre walked past her desk without being asked for ID. Watched as the manager called him sir. Watched the clipboard in her hand suddenly feel heavier. He didn't look back. He didn't have to, because sometimes the loudest statement is silence, and the sharpest suit is ownership. He walked the building alone that day, floor by floor, hallway by hallway, not to admire what he owned, but to understand what he had inherited. The walls were clean but hollow, the fixtures polished but impersonal. Everything was curated to look expensive, but none of it felt lived in. It was a property, not a place. It had been designed to impress, not to welcome. He made mental notes as he moved. The lighting was too cold, the lobby too loud, the units too similar. He wasn't thinking about resale value. He was thinking about presence. About how a building could either signal you're lucky to be here or whisper, you were always meant to be. And right now it was the former. He met with the property staff in a small office tucked behind the service hallway. Maintenance, security, cleaners, people who had never been invited to a boardroom, but who knew every inch of the place better than any architect. He listened to them, not as a formality, as instruction. They told him what really needed fixing, what corners were ignored, what vendors were lazy, what policies made their jobs harder. By the end of the meeting, he had more information than any spreadsheet could offer. He doubled their pay. No announcement, just a new direct deposit amount. Because respect doesn't need a press release. It needs follow-through. Meanwhile, the leasing team remained unaware. They still walked with clipped heels and stiff smiles. Still rehearsed exclusivity as a virtue. Still treated the building like a club, not a home. That was about to change. He drafted a new policy. No client could be turned away based on vibe, fit, or brand alignment. All appointments had to be honored. All applicants had to receive follow-up communication. No ghosting, no profiling. Everything logged, everything traceable. When the memo hit the inboxes, confusion followed. Then indignation, then silence. Because the message was clear. This is no longer a stage for status. This is a structure for people. Later that week, a woman walked in for a showing. Early 20s, nervous, wore a cheap suit that didn't quite fit. Spoke quietly, but with purpose. The leasing agent hesitated, started to say they were at capacity. But Andre was standing nearby. He said one word, "Show her." The agent flinched, then obeyed, because the rules were different now. After the tour, the woman thanked him, not knowing who he was, just knowing someone had made space for her to exist without apology. He watched her leave, then returned to the elevator, riding up in silence. Not to a penthouse, to the roof. He stepped out into the wind, looked over the city, and saw a skyline of thresholds. Buildings like his, barriers made of glass and steel and policy. And he thought, let this be the first one that welcomes. Not just the ones who look like they belong, but the ones who were told they never could. By the 4th month, the building no longer looked the same. The marble still gleamed, the windows still caught the morning light just right, but the atmosphere had shifted. It no longer repelled. It welcomed, not with slogans or banners, but with feeling. People walked through the lobby slower now, less tense, more curious. Conversations replaced glances. Smiles replaced nods. A new rhythm had settled in, and some people hated it. Not the residents, the gatekeepers. The old leasing staff watched the transformation like a storm slowly moving across the sky. They tried to maintain the tone, the posture, the distance, But it no longer worked. Clients walked in without rehearsed lines. Renters asked questions that didn't fit the brochure. Some even brought their families. It started to feel less like a showroom and more like a home. One agent quit, said the building had lost its edge. Another asked to be transferred to a different property. Andre approved both requests without comment. Because you don't need people who guard a door that's already open. He began repurposing spaces. The unused rooftop became a garden. The oversized fitness room, previously empty, turned into a shared studio space for art and design. One of the empty corner units on the ground floor became a co-working hub for local freelancers. Rent-free 1 year. He didn't announce these changes on a website. He didn't film a campaign. He just let them happen. Let word spread. Let people see and decide for themselves. Some of the original residents complained. Not about noise, about energy. They said it felt less exclusive. He didn't respond to the emails. He just let their leases expire. Because exclusivity had always been a cage pretending to be prestige. The building's waitlist grew. Not because of scarcity, because people had started hearing. There's a place where the rules feel different. One afternoon, he received a message from the same agent who once handed him a brochure with that condescending smile. She had seen the changes, knew who he was now. She asked for a meeting. He agreed. They sat in the lobby, same chairs, same space, different balance. She apologized, said she didn't mean to judge. He nodded, not coldly but firmly. She asked if there was a way to come back, to help build what was happening. He paused, then asked her what she thought the building stood for now. She answered in vague language, talked about values, community, inclusion. He shook his head, told her it wasn't about inclusion. It was about ending the performance, letting people show up as they are, not as they're expected to be. She looked down, and that was the answer. He didn't hire her back, not out of spite, out of integrity, because the building wasn't a redemption arc. It was a beginning, and every person who walked in needed to know they could belong without permission. By month 5, the building had become a conversation. Not in ads or headlines, but in barbershops and cafes, in text threads and family group chats. People spoke about it like a question they wanted answered. Is it true? Do they really let you apply without a broker? My cousin lives there. She says they gave her kid free tutoring in the community room. The story of the place grew faster than its footprint. Andre watched the ripples spread. He wasn't building a brand. He was building a reference point. Something people could point to and say, it doesn't have to be like that anymore. Inside, the team worked differently now. Not in cubicles, not in silence, but in pods, in motion, in layered conversation. Maintenance spoke with leasing. Security chatted with marketing. The hierarchies flattened not into chaos, but into awareness. Everyone knew what the other did. Everyone saw the whole picture. It made the building stronger. Tenants noticed. People stayed longer, paid on time, reported issues earlier. Because they felt invested. Not in ownership, but in stability. They knew someone was listening. One night, Andre walked into the shared lounge just after 9 p.m. The lights were dimmed. A single lamp lit the corner where 2 teenagers were working on a laptop, headphones split between them. Their mother stood in the hallway nearby, talking to another tenant about schools. This wasn't luxury. This was peace. And it was rarer. That same week, a development firm reached out. They had heard about the transformation. Asked if he'd consider a joint venture. Said they had a dozen properties in similar decline. Said they wanted to create the same magic. He declined. Not because he didn't believe in scale. Because you can't copy what you don't understand. This wasn't magic. It was intention. The building didn't work because it was beautiful. It worked because it stopped pretending beauty meant exclusion. A few days later, an older man came in to view a unit. He wore a suit 3 sizes too big. Hands calloused. Eyes tired. Said he'd saved for 2 years, finally ready to move out of the motel he'd been stuck in. The leasing assistant started to fumble, unsure how to respond. Andre was behind the desk. He stood, smiled, and said, "Let's take a look." The man walked through the halls slowly, like he was afraid to touch anything. When they reached the unit, Andre opened the door and let him walk in first. The man looked around, eyes wide. Then he turned and said, "You sure I'm in the right place?" Andre nodded. "You are now." The man didn't cry, but something in him shifted. The kind of shift you feel when the world finally says yes after a lifetime of almost. Later that night, Andre added a note to the internal directory. Unit 3B, leased. No footnotes. No explanation. Because moments like that don't need documentation. They just need to be protected. The 6th month came quietly. No fanfare, no event, no headlines. Just another sunrise through the east-facing windows, another slow hum of early footsteps in the lobby, another day in a building that no longer felt like it belonged to anyone and yet belonged to everyone inside it. The walls had stopped whispering intimidation. Now they carried sound, laughter from the stairwell, footsteps of kids on their way to school, the low bass of someone playing music while cooking dinner on the 6th floor. The building had life now. Not just movement, intention. People didn't just live here. They lived fully. Andre walked the halls the same way he always had, hoodie on, headphones draped around his neck, hands in pockets. He didn't flash keys. Didn't hold clipboards. He didn't need to. Everyone knew who he was. And no one made a show of it. That was the way he wanted it. The building worked now because it wasn't about him. It was about what he'd refused to compromise on. He passed a hallway where a young couple painted a canvas in silence. Turned the corner and saw a group of kids playing chess on the floor outside the laundry room. Passed by the new leasing assistant. Someone who once applied to 5 buildings in a single week and got ghosted by all of them. Now explaining tenant rights to a newcomer like she had always belonged behind that desk. And maybe she always had. It just took the right door opening. He made his way to the rooftop garden. An idea his operations lead had pitched, funded by residents, planted by volunteers, maintained by the quiet older woman from 2D, who never asked for anything until one day she brought a box of seedlings and said, "Can I?" She could. Now it bloomed. Tomatoes, herbs, wildflowers, a small bench where someone had carved a line into the wood. This is ours now. He sat there for a while watching the skyline, the other towers, the ones that still guarded their entryways with marble and silence, the ones that still filtered who got to feel safe, feel home, feel seen. He didn't resent them. He just knew they weren't built for what was coming. Because the people outside their doors had stopped knocking. They were building their own. Later that afternoon, a camera crew from a local documentary project arrived. They'd asked for a short interview. Something about urban reform, housing equity. He almost said no. But then he thought of the stories that didn't get told. The quiet shifts, the small freedoms, the dignity that doesn't make the news. So he said yes. They asked him to stand in the lobby. He did. They asked how it all started. He said, with a look. They asked what made him believe he could change something so old, so entrenched. He said, because I was never supposed to. And then they asked what he wanted people to know when they walked through those glass doors. He didn't answer right away. Just looked around the room, where a tenant held the elevator for a delivery guy, where a toddler ran across the marble without being hushed, where a man in work boots leaned against the mailboxes laughing into his phone. Then he said, you don't have to dress like you made it to live like you do. That evening he sat alone by the entrance. Just for a moment. No clipboard. No speech. No need. Because the building said it for him now. And it said it clearly. You belong.